So excellent. We are starting recording. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Becky Croton. I'm one of the senior lecturers with the University of Cumbria. I work with the SCAS part of the programme, but I'm going to do a session today relating to PebblePads, which is our e-portfolio. It's quite a new concept for people to kind of look at. A lot of the universities are now using e-portfolios. This is our version of that. Okay, so I will work through and then any questions, I'll try and monitor the chat at the same time and keep an eye on those. I've had a couple of questions go on the question board that I'll try and answer with this presentation as well. But if you've got any questions, as I said, drop them in the chat, put your hand up as in the virtual hand on Teams, and I'll try and answer those as we go along. There's a little bit of a PowerPoint, but a lot of it is going to be interactive. I will show you some of the concepts to do with PebblePad and its companion Pebble Pocket, and I will also show you some examples of previous students' work that I've got consent to show you different kind of formats of how students can evidence in PebblePad. So, first of all, if you want to register your attendance at this session for your CPD, then please feel free to scan this QR code, or when I put this, when we get this PowerPoint sent round later, you can click on the link and then you'll be able to sign in on the register as well. But if you scan the QR code now, then that will also take you there, and then you will get a chance to get a CPD certificate for this session. So as I said, we are recording today. But there is no identification of individual cases or anything like that. Okay. So PebblePad Portfolio, as I said, is the way that we assess students using the online work. So what is it? So all students complete a placement module basically as part of the degree, and its module code is this one above here, this 9009, developing values, skills and competencies of the paramedic, and it's a 40 credit module, runs the whole of the level 5, and then they do a separate one for level 6, so year 2 and year 3 of the course. Obviously they're APEL'd the first year to come in at year 2 of the course. As I've said already, it's an e-portfolio that's completed to support the learning and development in practice. It will provide evidence of their progression in level of competencies of skills and professional practice. And in total, there's 4 workbooks. And there's an induction workbook, which is basically a roadmap that the students complete within the first 3 weeks of the course. And basically, it's a checklist for the students to tick off as they achieve each step. And it runs through things like digital skills, academic writing, registering that with the library, that sort of thing. But that isn't something that practice-based you need to be concerned with. So the next one along is the skills workbook. Again, that is something that they complete at university. So that basically is the practical learning aspects that they do at university alongside the academic theory that they do. It's more of a self-assessment, reviewing how they progress with some peer review elements and tutor review elements built in. And as we go through this presentation today, I will show you the different types, the different workbooks and what's involved with them, okay? So the CAP and the ROP are the 2 workbooks really that you as practice-based educators need to be concerned with. The CAP basically contains all the practice-based competency assessments, and then the range of competencies increases each year and relates to the modules that they're studying during that year. And basically the students required to achieve increasing levels of competence throughout the year. And we'll go through how those are graded as we work through this session today as well. In year 2 at the moment, which is what most of you are dealing with your students, at the end of the programme, they'll be expected to have reached level 4 competence in all of the competencies within that CAP workbook. And again, I'll explain what those level of competencies relate to as we go through today's session. Now, the ROP workbook is more to do with their professional practice, their attitudes, their kind of HCPC standards of practice. So that's what it's aligned with. Someone's mic's just come on. That is more aligned with the HCPC standards of practice. The competencies for this are repeated each year, and basically the student is required to achieve increasing levels of competence year on year with this one. At the end of the programme, they're expected to reach level 4 competence in all of these competencies. So that's at the end of year 3. At the end of year 2, they're expected to be at level 3. But again, I'll go through that as I go through the separate workbooks. So frequently asked questions, I've tried to compile a list of this to help me basically work through some of the issues that we find. And I've been doing this program now for a year, so I've tried to go through most of the issues that we've kind of found throughout the year that make it a bit harder. And I'm going to kind of address those today. But obviously, if you have any questions on top of this that you think of throughout the session, then please let me know. So we're going to go through kind of how you share how the student shares the workbooks with you, what kind of evidence and ways of assessment are accepted, the amount and pieces of evidence that need to be submitted against each competence. If a competence isn't completed in practice, how does the student then evidence that? If they're unable to get a piece of evidence signed off on shift, is there a way that the clinician can remotely sign that off? We'll look at how monitoring and tracking progression within PebblePad can be done by a practice-based educator. I'm still waiting on a response to that because we tend to track them more from the university side, but I'll go through that as well. We've kind of spoke a little bit already about the level the student needs to be, but we'll go through that as well. And then the placement days that the students complete, where do they evidence information to do with that? I'm just going to say welcome to Jane as well, who's just joined us. She's a senior lecturer within the university on the CCAM programme. So she's going to be there to back me up today and maybe keep an eye on the chat if that's all right, Jane.
Yes, I can absolutely do that. And I recognise some names in the chat box as well. So hello.
Thank you, Jane. So first off, let's see. So how to access it? How does the student access it? Well, when they start with us at the university for their program, they are giving an iPad as part of the course. And the PebblePad app is already on there for them to access. We then get them to download a Pebble Pocket app that goes on their iPad, but they can also download that to their phone. And then the evidence can be completed and stored in that Pebble Pocket app. Okay, so as I said, it's all via the iPad and via the Pebble Pocket. I'm just going to, I've got all this linked on my phone, so I'm just going to share my phone as well as far as showing you Pebble Pocket and everything via the phone. So let's see if I can get this to work. Okay. Saying that I'm getting feedback. So I'll turn that off for now and we'll try and work out a way of doing that in a minute. So basically when they get the Pebble Pocket up, this is how it looks. You'll see there's various different things here of how they can create evidence. They can create posts, a reflection, record an experience, and they can also go into this tab here, which is the Cumbria Paramedics app. Let me just see if I can get this to work again because it will make much better. Right, no feedback now, so that makes it easier. So let me just go into the Pebble Pocket and I'll be able to show you the app and just give you a quick demonstration of how that all works. So let me stop sharing on this one. So in a minute, hopefully, it should start. Yeah. So you can see here that everything's broadcasting. So let's go back to where we were. So the Pebble Pocket app looks like this. Okay, so as I said, so the main one that the students will use is this one that says University of Cumbria Paramedics. Go into that and it's got lots of different templates that they can use. The timesheet we ignore because that's done in a different system. The main one they're going to use through this is the BSc competency. And that basically is a template that they can use quickly out on shift that they can enter the information for. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But basically, that's where they find the templates that they need to fill in to add to their PebblePads. Okay, so that's the Pebble Pocket app, which relates to the PebblePad workbooks. So let's just stop sharing that for now. And then we can return to the PowerPoint. Okay. So basically, the different workbooks are navigated in the same way. Okay, so I will do a live navigation in a minute. They all access the workbooks from the resources area and they save it to the asset area. I'll show you how to do all this in a minute. All of the workbooks have got a how-to page. The tabs along the top link to the different modules that are being studied at university, and then the relevant skills, competencies and professional values relating to those modules, and then a separate workbooks and skills passport for the level 2 level 5 and level 6. So if we stop sharing the PowerPoint, and then I will show you what the PebblePad looks like. So when a student logs into PebblePad, this is the screen that they will see. Okay, so to get their workbooks initially, we go through this with them at university, but sometimes they may need assistance with it on the road as well. So basically they go into this resources tab here. And then in this resources tab, they will see lots of different things, but they will see at the bottom here, you'll be able to, I don't know if I can get my laser up, I can't, but there's this clinician assessment of practice and the record of professional practice. And then they need to save those. So they click into it and then they press save, and that will then save it to their own PebblePad. So when they go into their main page again of their PebblePad, they click on the assets, and then those workbooks appear then in their assets. Okay, so that's initially how they get the workbooks onto their PebblePad, so then they can work through them. So the different workbooks that you need to be involved with, I'll show you them now, and I'll just show you quickly how you navigate through them. So there's the CAP workbook, which I said is the clinician assessment of practice. As I said, there's an instructions and test page, and this it sets everything out for the students as to what needs to be done. It's got some information in there about methods of assessment, but we'll touch on these later in the presentation. Again, the developmental levels and descriptors we'll talk about later, but all this information is included in the workbook. And then you'll see there's this clinical skills tab here. So what we have now added to this is a full list of the competencies that the students are expected to evidence against, and we've done like a quick reference list right at the beginning so they can see all the different things that they need to do, and they can download that, they can print that off and have that as a separate file if they want to on the road, if they find it easier to refer to like that. Okay, so that is there, and then you'll see down here there's different systems and different things that they're studying at university that they then need to sign off against. Okay, so obviously respiratory system is this one here, and then there's different evidences that they can add and go through here. So when we talk about formative and summative sign-offs, again, I'll go through those and what is required of those. You will notice at the moment it does say please attach a minimum of 3 pieces of formative evidence. The students don't actually need to do a minimum of 3. We are in the process of updating the workbooks at the moment, and I'll go through what's expected as far as the amount of evidence when we talk about the styles of evidence in a bit. And then the other thing so when we talk about these competencies, anyone can sign these off of NQP2 and above. The end of year sign off is just for the practice educator to sign off. Okay, so as they're working, we're very much appreciative that the practice educators have a lot of students attached to them out on the road, so they're not always able to work with their students. So as far as their sign-offs go, formative and summative sign-offs can be done by all grades above NQP2 and above, but the end of year sign-off is just with the practice educator. So that's the clinical assessment, clinician assessment in practice. The other workbook that you will be dealing with on the road is the what we call the ROP, the Record of Professional Practice. And as I said, this is more to do with how these students conduct themselves, levels of conversations that they might need to have with other healthcare professionals, and it's to do with HCPC standards and things like that. So there's a little bit more involved in this one, but not too much for the practice educators to do compared to the CAP. So again, there's a codes of conduct here, and what we have added here is the University of Cumbria Student Code of Conduct, the HCPC Conduct and Ethics, and there's also links in the individual work, but it's not in this one because this is mine, but it would be to the specific trusts. So whatever policies are related to codes of conduct within your trust will also be linked into these. And then the students have to sign to say that they have read those and they will adhere to them as a student. Again, there's an instructions page that sets everything out for the students. Then there's a student and mentors meeting tab. Now, what we ask is, most of you will be aware, we hold 3 TPR meetings, so tripartite review meetings during level 5, so the year 2 of the programme. What we ask is that you still meet with your students outside of those meetings, preferably before those meetings, and you have a chat with them. So 3 meetings a year where you do your initial, your interim and your final meeting to basically discuss with them what they want to achieve in practice, do a SWOT analysis, any opportunities for experiences and learning, and just kind of get to know your student and what their aims are for the year. And again, that template can be found within the Pebble Pocket. There is a learning contract in there that contains a SWOT analysis. Let me see if I can show you that now. Okay, so again, you should see the Pebble Pocket app appear. So again, you go into the University of Cumbria, there's a paramedic learning contract tab just down here. And again, that can all be filled in. It's there as a template for yourself and your students to use. So what they're trying to achieve, how it's going to be reviewed, deadlines can be put in there, and then there is a template there for a SWOT analysis as well. And then you can sign off that yourself, and the students then save that. They add that to their Pebble Pocket, their PebblePad. Let me stop sharing that. And then as far as the ROP workbook goes, this then gets added in down the bottom here. They would add that in. Okay, so when they save that contract on their Pebble Pocket, that will go into their assets, and they would just click on this, add evidence, and then they would be able to add an asset from this area here and then be able to save that. So by the end of the year, they'd have those 3 meetings into their ROP workbook. Orientation and placements. So this is more for the 5 off-the-job days that the students need to complete throughout the year. They do this in both year 2 and year 3. We had some issues initially because of COVID. People weren't able to go into different departments, but my understanding is some of the trusts now are allowing their students to go into other areas. So these work placements days need to be done under the trust umbrellas. They're not hospital placements or GP surgery placements or anything like that. And what we'd expect is basically that wherever they do it, they do an orientation, and that gets signed off by the student once the orientation is complete. And then they would be able to add some information later on regarding those placements. Okay, but wherever they go, they should be doing an orientation and then filling in this template here. So on the road in their practice placements, these again are the competencies that they will be evidencing against. So again, right at the beginning, there is a full list of competencies that they need to go through. So there's a quick reference list there that they can have a look at. And then, as I said, this is more related to their conduct, their values and things like that. So you can see here, respect and uphold the rights, dignity and values. And then that works through, so you've got professional values, communication and collaboration, patient assessment and management of risk. And again, I will show you some ideas of how the students can evidence that in a bit. There is a survey user feedback form, which the students can get patients, obviously in non-life-threatening situations, to complete to get feedback on how they've been with that patient or patient's family. Or maybe another healthcare professional they've worked alongside. Again, the template for this can be found in their Pebble Pocket. There is an area here on gaining consent, but this is more for the student. There's some videos here on ethics and consent and confidentiality and privacy that students can watch on their own time. And then there is a tab here on multidisciplinary working. And where they can add the reflections. This will kind of be used more for, again, those placement days that they do, that they're working with other healthcare professionals. And then again, there's this end of year sign off that the practice educator will sign off. Okay, so that's kind of how the two workbooks look. And we'll go through some more areas to do with evidence. So let me just stop sharing those for a bit. So that's what we've just done now, how they navigate through and all the different how-to pages and everything else. So types of assessment. As I briefly mentioned, there are various different types of assessment that can be used. We use the terms formative, summative and an end of year sign off. So the formative are the ones that, as they're progressing through the year, they promote the students' learning and their ability under conditions in which they can think creatively and how they're going to manage that job and that situation, treatment plans, things like that. And then they take time to learn that skill thoroughly with the support of the supervising clinicians. As I said, trust variants, but I speak from SCAS, we count the clinician, the supervising clinician, as anyone from NQP2 and above. I know some of the other trusts vary with that, so it would just be need to make sure within your trust that the relevant clinicians are signing the evidence off. So then the summative evidence will be then signed off when you've made a final judgment and the student's performance that they've kind of reached the desired level. So as we said, as far as the CAP workbook, so the clinician assessment in practice, that is to be at level 4 by the end of the year. The ROT workbook for year 2 is level, in year 2 will be level 3. As you move into year 3, that kind of then moves up the grey boundaries. But again, this is all evidenced in the workbook. So if you are unsure, just ask your student to look at their workbooks and it's all set out in there for you. Again, this can be any supervising clinician who does the summative sign-off. So again, it doesn't have to be the practice educator who does that summative sign-off. And as I mentioned before, there doesn't need to be, say there's some of the skills in there are stuff that they might have done as an ECA or a technician or an AAP. So it might be something they've been doing in practice for a few years. So they might only add one formative piece of assessment and one summative piece of assessment to show that they've reached the desired level of competency in those skills. Where we'd expect to see more types of formative would be something maybe like cannulation or using an eye gel and some of the other new skills that they've learned since being on the paramedic course. But something like maybe doing an ECG or taking a set of basic observations. You know, you could just, they could evidence that once formatively for that and then have a summative sign off because that's seen. And that can be done, as I said, by any supervising clinician. And as I said already, the end of year sign off is the practice educator makes that professional judgment to say that the student has reached the competency level required to move into the next level of the programme, or if it's the end of year 3 to qualify as a paramedic. And the competencies should all be assessed against the HCPC standards and the required paramedic skill sets at the end of the academic year. Okay, so if you're not aware with the HCPC standards, that might be a website to go on and make your kind of familiarity with those documents. So that's the types of assessments that we kind of talk about and refer to. So different methods of assessment. So we'll talk through these and then I'll show you some actual evidence that students have used throughout the last year to kind of show their competency. So some of these you'll be familiar with if you've assessed the students from other universities. These aren't new ways of observing or providing evidence. We have to kind of think outside the box sometimes. We can't prescribe what kind of jobs the students are going to in the ambulance service, as we well know. So we need to look at the various different types of assessment that can be used. So if you manage to see your student demonstrate a skill, then we would expect there to be either a direct observation or the evidence uploaded is a direct observation. So basically, whoever the student is working with has observed them in the application of the skill in clinical practice. It's the most frequently used. That BSc competency template that I showed you earlier via PebblePad is the template they would use to fill in. And basically the assessor verifies that the student has a certain skill level and they make frequent use of this method to ensure they're consistent in their performance. And I'll show you the kind of standard of write-up we expect for that. It's not chapter and verse that we want. It's just a very brief description. And again, I'll show you what we kind of expect from that in a minute. The other way that a student might want to evidence is actually it's a testimony or a witness statement, something like that. The assessor writes basically, rather than the student writing up the evidence and the assessor signing it off, it would be the assessor writes the evidence and kind of says that whoever they are has directly seen and witnessed the person doing this and they're happy they're doing it to a certain standard. So those are if you see this and the student has demonstrated the skill. As we know, this isn't always possible in the world that we work in. So there's various different ways. If they're getting towards the end of their year and they maybe haven't come across cardiac arrest or they haven't dealt with a gynecological emergency, then there's other ways that these can be evidence. So a professional discussion, basically if the skill can't be assessed, then you can have a discussion with the student you're working with around that competence and how they might deal with it if they were to come across it in practice. Sometimes when you've been to a job, it might lead into a professional discussion. So maybe if you've done, if you've been to someone who's having a glycemic emergency, but it's only been you only need to rectify it by them maybe eating carbohydrates and things like that, rather than actually giving any sort of medication. That job could lead into a professional discussion about how the student might manage that patient if their blood sugar had been lower, if they've been in a more reduced GCS state, that sort of thing. So you could use a job that maybe wasn't directly related to a competence to have a professional discussion around that. Again, there's simulation. That is another way that it can be evidenced. The students do quite a lot of simulation within the university environment. And we're always encouraging them to take videos, as in the university environment, not in practice, obviously. And then if they do get to the end of the year and they haven't managed to do something in practice, they might be able to use that video as evidence. It might be that a group of students get together with a practice educator and they manage to borrow some kit and they run some scenarios and they video them doing that. So that's another way that the simulation can be involved. And again, I'll show you some evidences that relate to that in a minute. And then OSCEs as well. So obviously we do a couple of OSCEs within the university environment, and it might be that assessment method is being videoed and they use that video to evidence against that competency. So as I've already said, this is the kind of evidence levels that we expect by the end of year 2. So level 4 for their CAP and level 3 for their ROPS. Okay, so that's just a reminder there. And what we mean by that is that it is So 1 and 2 might be where they are at the beginning, maybe 2, 1 normally because they're coming in at year 2 of the programme, they've been APEL'd the first year, 1 isn't used that much. But it might be so they've kind of, when they've been shown cannulation, they're not quite, they haven't been formatively assessed on it yet at university, so they're not able to do it in practice. It might be that they prepare the equipment for the clinician to carry that out, and they've got a broad understanding of principles and concepts involved. So that might be one that would then be marked as assisting. If they carry out the activity, but again with minimal supervision and guidance, this is what we class as supervised. So the independent one, the level 4, is more when they can carry it out where they haven't had direct supervision. Now, it doesn't mean that they have to do it totally independently, as in you don't have any input whatsoever, but it means you haven't had to stand there throughout the whole procedure while they're doing it, okay? And you haven't actively needed to intervene or anything like that. So that's what we mean by independent. They've managed to complete the skill of their own accord, and you haven't had to intervene in any way, okay? So it's the Steinacre and Bell competency framework that we refer to when we talk about this level 1 through 4. Okay, so let me stop sharing that, and then I'll show you some actual evidence. What is examples of evidence and what's accepted. So we'll go back to the PebblePads and we'll work through. Hi, Hannah. Yeah, I'll put that in a bit. Bear with. Let me just get that for you now. I'll do that now, otherwise I will forget. There we go. That's now in the chat for you. So let's show you some PebblePad examples. So we'll go back to my PebblePad. So what I'm going to do is show you some of the evidence that has been submitted and is deemed to be an appropriate form of evidence to show competency. There's lots of different forms, there's lots of different ways of doing that, and I have been given permission to share these, so I shall work through some of them with you. I'm going to show you the skills workbook as well, although you don't have any involvement with marking that or anything to do with that side of it. I think it would be useful for you to see what they're filling in at university and how that then fits into what they then do in practice. So I will first of all show you so this student has obviously 5120 is one of the modules they do at university, and this is kind of the ALS module, some aspects of this. So this is where the skills come from relating to this. So what they've done for that, they've gone through, so this one here, so OP insertion, MP insertion, iGel insertion. So what they've done here is they've uploaded a video of themselves doing an iGel insertion. So I'm not going to show the whole video, but that's what would then appear in their skills workbook. What they've then done is reflect on their clinical skill. This person was an AAP beforehand, so it was something they were quite familiar with and they felt relatively confident with that. And then they've used this here to get peer feedback. So it's, the T is tell, the A is ask a question, and the G is some guidance that they might give. And then as a tutor, I've gone in and basically said that this student has completed a formative assessment and they're deemed competent in that skill. So that's kind of what they're evidencing at university. Something like endotracheal intubation, on this course, they're not being taught how to do that as a skill. So what this student has done, they've actually gone away and written a piece of evidence about how that skill is completed by people who can do intubation and how they would assist with obviously passing the bougie and that side of things. So this is how another form of evidence that they've used to show that skill competence within the university environment. And then I'll just show you here for the trauma module. So for all these different ones here, again, they've uploaded videos of them practicing that skill. As you can see here, these are all different videos that they have done, and they've done it a few times because this is a new skill that they wanted to revisit and improve their competence in. For the trauma patient assessment, they've done it in a slightly different way. So we gave them a scenario university that they then worked through in a practical scenario sense. And what this student has done is she's gone away and written about this reflection. So again, she's used one of the templates that are available to them through Pebble Pocket and PebblePad. And she's written a reflection here as to what the scenario was, what her reaction was to the event, analysed kind of what went on. Future planning, how she might change how she approaches that situation if she was to deal with it in practice, and then an overall reflection relating to that. So that's how this student has gone about reflecting how her practice will improve. So that's a different few ways there within the skills workbook. Another way this can be done, we close this one down. And we will go back to here. So what we have also incorporated are some peer review forms for the students to use to get some feedback. And I will show you one of those. So this student here, for his, again, going to 5120. So when he was doing his iGen insertion, he's again uploaded a video here that you can see that shows him doing this skill. Okay, so that's him actually performing it. He's then reflected on this. And then, oh, trust me to pick the only one. Let's go into MP. And then he's got a peer here to do a peer review. So it's a document again that he's uploaded as asset and then tagged. So this then is a Word document they can link to. And basically, there's a template there for them to for the peer to fill in and give them some peer feedback. So this peer can be either another student on the course, or it could be a peer in practice that they show the video to, and they then give them the form and they fill this in. And then it works through, it gives them some areas of strength, what could be improved on, and then general comments. So they get that structured feedback, which is a really important part of the programme. So that's another way that the evidence can be completed. So that's their skills work, but that's what they're working through in the university environment to gain those skills going forward. The other thing that you'll see in their skills workbook, this is what they should be showing you at the start of each shift to demonstrate what they can complete in practice at this time. So they need to be assessed to a certain, we formatively assess them in a university environment after teaching them a skill, then they are allowed to come out and do that in practice. So they do have a skills passport, as all other students in the past have had. And then there is this tick element here that once we have deemed them competent to do in practice, they're competent on a mannequin, they're safe in their procedure, then we will go in and tick the box to say that they're able to do that. And obviously, as they work through the year, then the tick boxes are evidenced. So that's what you should be looking at as well, whether you're a practice educator or a clinician working with a student, ask to see their clinical skills passport, and then you'll be aware that the actual skills that they can perform in practice. So that's their skills workbook. So now I'll show you some evidence or examples of evidence in the CAT workbook. I just need to go back to a previous cohort to show you that. So we'll go to the clinical clinician assessment of practice book first, and I'll show you some examples of witness statements that have been used. So this student has chosen to use witness statements as part of her evidence. So what she has done is she has used the template on the Pebble Pocket as advised, and then basically they upload this as an asset, and then they tag alongside that. I'll show you how to do that process in a bit as well, in case more to help guide your student. It's something the student does, but it might sometimes they get a little bit stuck with the technology aspect. So I'll just kind of run through that, so you can always reflect back on this video to help the student. So this student here, this is their asset, and basically what they've done is use the template as I showed you earlier on Pebble Pocket. This person has got their clinician to just write a short statement as to they've witnessed carrying out respiratory assessments on patients. So this is as an overall. So they've obviously worked a few shifts together. They've done a few, the students completed a few different respiratory assessments on different patients, and the clinician who's been working with her is quite happy that she is confident and independent in what she is doing. So she is signed to that degree here, and then that's been uploaded. I'm just trying to think of some other ones here. So again, this is another one, just a short comment, as in OBS were required, a respiratory assessment was completed, and the treatment that was quickly given to that patient. So as I said, they don't need to be full reflections. They don't need to take hours to write up. They're just short write-ups that are evidence and added to. Another example of this is in this tab here. If we go down to the ECGs here. So basically the students have to go through and recognise different ECG rhythms, and then there's a add section here, and they would add the evidence to it. So what this student has done, she's added various different witness statements. So just saying that this is what she identified on an ECG, so that was competence against that one. And there's different ones added to here. So some of them are pictures of a strip that they've identified. And again, some of them are witness statement write-up. So that's one way that the witness statements can be done. As we stated, another version of evidence would be a professional discussion. And this student has evidence that on here. Let me just find the right one for you. I think it was here. Hang on a second. Yep, BLS. So I've had a little bit of a professional discussion here around recognising VT and VF and what the student understands for them, and what the check is that needs to be done as far as checking for a pulse. So that's one of the professional discussions there. There was one, there we go, these ones down here. So this one here. So discuss procedures for HOT principles during traumatic cardiac arrest. So again, the evidence that's been uploaded here is that they discussed defibrillation. They've there's been a witness statement there as well. There's been some discussion around that, and they've also then discussed the HOT protocols and what's understood and everything like that. So that's kind of then uploaded as a witness statement and professional discussion around those aspects. Another form of evidence that some students have chosen to use, which I think is quite a good way, is uploading certificates that shows that they've gone away and looked at the competence that needs evidence in, and maybe they haven't done that in practice. So one example of this would be, just scoot down here a second. So this student here has done a resus room session, and has got a certificate of completion there, that she's completed a newborn life support module. So she's uploaded that as some evidence that she's gone away and done that. Another student has chosen, again, certificates of evidence as a way of showing exploration and competence. Again, this can't be signed off by a practice educator, so it wouldn't be really relevant for a summative sign-off, but it is something that can be more of a kind of if they're struggling to provide competence in that area, it can be something that could be considered. So we obviously always encourage the students to demonstrate those competencies if they can, but this is more kind of if they're getting to the end of the year and they're struggling because they haven't done a paediatric arrest or a newborn, need to use newborn life support skills. So this one here, what they've actually gone and done was they have done their e-learning at work, and they have highlighted what they've done and that they have completed it and passed it, and obviously the dates show that it was relevant to this, so that's what they've done to evidence their learning and progression against newborn life support. Okay, so that's another kind of form of evidence that can be submitted into the formative aspects. Another one where it's quite hard to gain competence sometimes is there's a medicines area in their clinical assessment book. So some of the students have thought a little bit outside the box with this as to how they're going to evidence this. So the medicines tab down here, as we know, as paramedics, there's quite a lot of medications we can give these days. There's a whole list here of ones that they need to go away and kind of show a competency against. So this student has shown lots of different examples of what she might do. So for one of them here, she has obviously looked at what's going on and done some reading around, so chlorpheniramine here, legal aspects, so legal issues. So this is evidence that she's gone away and done some reading around the subject of medicines. Other ones that she has looked at, I'm trying to think if it was the naloxone here. So she's kind of just done a write-up here of considerations, indications, and just done a little bit of her own kind of study around that medication. And what other ones has she done? So some of these, as you can see here, are linked to jobs. So these will be that she's been to a job and done some kind of preparation. This one here, cardiac arrest. So she's done a write-up here explaining the drugs that have been given. And so that's kind of a more practical, it's been seen, it's been done. So those are the different types of kind of evidences they can use for that. And then other ones that can be evidenced are, so other types of written evidence. So if we go into this one here, this student, they've got an agreement at the moment with South Central Ambulance Service and all the local hospitals that not students, any member of staff can go and do like a progression day within the stroke unit. Obviously, this doesn't count towards the students off the job hours because it's not under the trust umbrella, but this student has gone in their own time to work alongside the stroke coordinator, and then she has done some writing regarding that. So if I just show you, how is it? So this one actually is to do with just a write-up. So what she's kind of gone away and done a little bit of research into, so it's evidence-based, as you can see here. She's done some research into the FAST test and the evidence behind it and why it's kind of, why it's used in practice. So she's kind of done a little bit more writing here about what it is, and then as you can see, she's listed all her references here. So this is a really good example of evidence-based treatment and looking into different assessment tools that we use and why we use them. This one here, again, she's done a write-up about shadowing the stroke team. So her learning points, what she's learned from doing that day, assessment, what she's learned that day. So she's gone into the Rosier School here. What the hospital teams will do, and different learning points she gained from doing that day in the stroke unit. So that's another way of evidencing her competency. And then what the student also did, I'll show you here. So airway and ventilation. So again, when they were discussing the intubation, again, she's gone away and written up here how the technique would what the technique would be, and how the process would work through, and that's been discussed then with her mentor, who's then signed her off with that evidence against that competence. Okay, so that again is some different ways that the students can evidence those competencies within the clinician assessment practice workbook. Moving into the ROP workbook. So again, this was more the professional practice side of things. I can show you here when we talked about those student meetings earlier and where they would fill in those learning contracts and where they would add them. You can see here the student has added all 3 of the meetings. So they've got their initial meeting, their interim meeting, and their final meeting. And then those templates in there discuss how they're getting on in practice, what the SWOT analysis is, how that student's going to perform and work towards. So that's an example there of the learning contracts and how they're added. Some examples of witness statements of this. So as I said, these standards and attributes here are what they're evidencing against competency-wise for their ROP workbook. So this person here has used quite a lot of witness statements. So if you go in here, just click on this one, you can see there's a witness statement written up here as to what that student had attended, how she performed with her level of care, professionalism, and that is against this professional practice. You can see here that there's a variety that she's claiming the competence for, and that is another thing that can be done, that one piece of evidence can be put against multiple competencies, and I'll show you how the mapping tool for that works in a minute. So that's an example of witness statements. One here as well from a different student is this one was more of a feedback example, that this student had been to a job with someone in another, so it was a trauma job, I think, and Heart turned up. So they have this response team, and they provided, the student had contacted one of those paramedics who turned up with Heart and asked to provide some feedback, and this was given. So she uploaded this here as an example of proving competence. So again, feedback from incident statement, introduce who she is and introduced how this student then worked on this job and what she's demonstrated, many of the HCPC standards of proficiency, and related back to that. So that was done as a like a feedback sign off, kind of a witness statement, but more to do with the feedback that and everything like that. So that's another form of evidence that can be submitted. This student as well. It's in this one here. No, it's not the student. Let's go to another one. So this student, again, to try and evidence what the competence was. So this one here is 1.3, which is practice in a non-discriminatory manner. So what this this learner has gone and done is done a write-up about unconscious bias. Let me just open it up. Again, it's a Word document. And she's gone away and done some evidence-based research again and found out recent evidence as to what the topic of unconscious bias, and done a write-up about that and related it back to her own practice in healthcare settings, how it relates to education. And then she's obviously referenced these down here as well. So yeah, she's done a little bit of reflection, but evidence-based, looking at the material that's out there to increase her underpinning knowledge. Another way that this student has evidenced is to use shift reports. So obviously, as practice-based educators, you go out and work with your students, you write up shift reports. So what this student has done here is added her shift report in as a document. And again, this kind of goes through everything it's relating to communication, relating to decision making, pathways, handovers and referrals, SCAS values and things like that. Okay, so this is another way there that this can be evidenced. I do apologise for the barking going on in the background. My dog going nuts because the postman's just been. Another one that this student has done here. So breaking of bad news is what she needed evidence against. And here it said what has happened. And she's also related back then to policies that are used within the ambulance service, which give guidelines on how we break bad news, and what the guidance is there. And then she's referenced that as well. So this is another kind of where she's evidenced against, she said what's happened, but she's gone away and looked into policies that support and looks at the evidence out there that we use to kind of to improve our working skills and competencies. One here as well is a reflection that this patient has used. So an ALS OSCE formative here that she's done, she's gone away. So this was a formative OSCE that we did on a practice day at university. This is the scenario that she was given. She's worked through here how she approached the scene, what the checks are that she's done, how she's performed, and then she's reflected on that and what she would maybe take for learning for future sessions. So that's another piece of evidence that she's uploaded to that. And again, she's referenced this and gone away and looked at the evidence behind the procedure. And another way here. So this patient, this learner here has included a few different ways of evidencing. So the evidence, the competencies that she's evidencing against was take into account the applicable health and safety legislation, any relevant safety policies and procedures in enforced in the workplace. So she's done a e-learning module on water awareness. And then she's uploaded a screenshot here that she's gone away and done that in relation to that competence. And then this one here was the individual hygiene observations, the audits that we have to do as well. So that was another way that she is proving competence against that skill. So there's all different ways that we can, the students can evidence against. So that is a few different examples of competency. So it's not always that they have to do write-ups about how that job's gone. They can use that template. Obviously, let me just show you, go back to the CAP workbook. So this student has chosen a lot of her evidence is kind of just write-ups of jobs. That's a witness statement. Let's try this one. Bear with, sorry. So as you can see here, so this patient has basically written about the type of job that they went to, what she's done, and then the patient was transported to ED for further assessment. So that again, that would be your general write-up that a lot of the competencies are approved with. Okay. So as far as signing these off as a clinician who's working with these students, initially, normally what we would say, let me just stop sharing that. We'll go back to that in a minute. What normally happens is on the Pebble Pocket. Sorry, I'm just trying to. show you on here. So what would normally happen? Apologies, IT issues. There we go. What would normally happen is the student would be on the road, they do a job, at the end of that job, they go into this, they would go into the BSc competency, they would do that quick write-up like I've just said, and then as the clinician working, you would add your signature there, and then it would be saved to the device. So you just click on that, and then continue to sign. You would add your name, email, signature, and then that would be once you've added. So it's just literally you can draw on the screen, you can tap on, and then that then gets saved up by the student to their PebblePad. So so I did one of these yesterday, and then I uploaded it to my PebblePad. So let me show you what happens. So once the students then upload to their PebblePad, go into my assets, this is what they will see. So obviously they've got their workbooks all here. This is the assessment document that I did yesterday. So this would then appear here as an asset. So if I click on it, you can see here, this would be an example of just a basic write-up. So 72-year-old female, short of breath, observation, rest with this, they're able to talk. The student could then go on to give a summary of treatment, management pathways, and then if you wanted to, you could write a little paragraph as the mentor or clinician working with them as to what that student did. So completed a full supervised respiratory assessment. So what then needs to be done is when you're filling this in on the road with the student, you then click to what level the student completed that skill to, okay, and then you would sign it. So that's where it would appear in their workbook, okay. So if they wanted to tag that then to the competencies, they would go into their workbook. So we go into the CAP workbook, so that's the clinical skills, respiratory system. And so we've done a respiratory assessment, we've done some patient observations. So what they would do is they click on add and add evidence, okay? And they'd want to add an asset. And so we've got our asset here that I want to use, this respiratory assessment. So they click on that. Okay, and that then would add that to that particular one. Another way of doing this is to click on this I want to tab up here. Let me just. There is a way of mapping these over. I just need to update my workbook to see if it does it that way. We'll work that out in a minute. So that's how they add an asset, okay? And there is a way of mapping that they can go through and they can basically map one piece of work to various competencies. For some reason, that function doesn't seem to be working on my workbook at the moment. Let me just have another go. Everything appears to be going into meltdown. There we go. Let's have a look again. No. Let me just see if I can view it from someone else's workbook.
That time of day, Becky. When
I know, it's all slowing down, isn't it?
North America joins the internet. starts messing with our minds.
So I tried this yesterday and I was able to map, but for some reason I can't map at the moment. I will show you, there is a video that I've attached to the presentation as well, which shows how to map across. Let me just check in the ROC workbook and see if it allows me to do it in the ROC workbook. That's not letting me do it for some reason. I'll have to come back to that at another stage. So that's how they add those pieces of evidence to their competencies. There is a way, they don't always, as we said, they don't always need to use that template. So they would then save it as a Word document or the certificate, and then basically to add that. So say they were in their assets, and then you can upload a file. And then basically you can either drag a file in or they can choose a file from wherever they've saved it on their desktop or in documents or their OneDrive or whatever. So they can go in and they can add to a document to their assets then and link that to a competence then. As far as sharing the workbooks with yourselves, they can do that. I'll show you quickly how that will do. And they can also share assets, because we're very much aware that sometimes, obviously, most of the time on the road at the moment, I think most services are around REAP 4. Time on the road is very precious. Time after jobs is very limited. So actually trying to get these competencies and these pieces of evidence signed off to a timed element doesn't always work. So as a practice-based educator, what I would, when you first meet with your student at that first meeting that I've advised, I would get them to show you, share with you their workbooks. So the way they do this is they go into their asset store, and as they go along, there's this little person here. Okay, so they click on that, and then they click on I want to, and it's share. And then they edit my existing web share for those without a PebblePad account to see my work. They click on that. They can tick a box so it allows you to leave comments on there, and then view this asset on the web and then copy this URL. Okay, so what they would then do is once they've copied that, they close this down. They would go into their emails. And then they would send a new email. Okay. So if I wanted to send this to my SCAS account, I would click in that and I would paste my URL into that. Send that over. Okay, so we'll close that down. Go back onto PebblePad. And then that will come to me on my SCAS. And then what I would then do, let me stop sharing that. So that would then come through to me. And what I can then do is click on this link. And then I would see that link there. And that is then the CAP workbook that student is then showing with me. And I can go along and see what they've then added. So we can go into the clinical skills bit. And you can, it's a live link. So anytime the student updates anything to that, you would be able to see that. So as I've done it, you can leave comment. You'd be able to go into their assets that they've uploaded. And then you'd be able to click in this top right corner. And then you could add a comment in that box there. And basically you add your name in. So if you weren't able to sign it off on the road at the time, what you could do is write a little bit of text in there saying, I have seen Becky perform this skill to either a supervised level or independent level. So you're saying what level on that Steinaker and Bell competency framework that you've seen them complete it to. And I'm happy that they are proficient in this skill. And then you would sign that off with either with your PA number, so your HCPC PA number, and that would be then recognised in electronic signature. That's what we would recognise that you could do that, because we're very much aware that sometimes actually getting it signed on the road. We are trying to find another way to work around this, but this is a workaround that we found at the moment. Okay, so this is what can happen as far as sharing a whole workbook, so you can go in and review your student's workbook. So let me stop sharing that. So the students can do that with a whole workbook, or they can do it with an asset. So that was sharing a whole workbook. As I said, if they just wanted feedbacks on an asset, they would just go to this write-up here that they've done. Same way again, I want to, and then share with the web, allow a viewer to leave the comment, and then share the asset. And then you would get this copy URL, which would then be sent over in an email. So I've just noticed now that clicking on that, I want to map. Okay, so if I've uploaded a piece of evidence that I want to then map to multiple competencies, basically they click on this evidence here. That's what they want to do. Click on the sharing. I want to map. What that then does is bring up the different workbooks that they have. So it would be this one that they'd want to map it to, and it brings up the different clinical skills, and it brings up the respiratory assessment. So this was a respiratory one, so I want to link it to this one here. And if it is my final piece of evidence, my summative, I'd click the summative box as well. So I'd done a peak flow with this patient. I want to evidence against that. I want to evidence against the respiratory assessment and the ability to record the observations. You would then click on next. You could then just add one justification or create separate justifications, save that. And when you go back into the CAP workbook, under that respiratory tab, you see that one piece of evidence has been uploaded against all the different competencies. So they don't need to go into each individual one and upload it. They just click on the asset, and then that gets clicked over. Okay, so that's a way of multiple mapping. That's one of the new elements that they've added into PebblePad. So this bit down here, the student reflection on progress, at the end of the year before they hand these books in to be signed, they should basically be doing a short write-up here, again, only a couple of sentences, just to reflect on what they've learned since joining the course to where they are now and how their knowledge of assessing the respiratory system or cardiovascular system, whatever it is, evidencing against, has improved. So that's the little bit there at the end of that. I don't think there's anything else that we need to show at the moment. So I'm just going to stop sharing. Just go back to the PowerPoint to make sure that we have covered everything in there, because I'm very much aware that we've been on now for just over an hour. So let's get to where we were. So just not sharing my screen again. So this is what we'd got to, wasn't it? We got to what the competency framework was. So there are various bits of supporting information that you can get access to, and these links that I've put on here should be accessible even though you don't have a University of Cumbria email address or anything like that. I've managed to find a way of sharing this evidence with you. So these links will take you to various videos, how-to guides that are usable for yourself and your students. So this competencies needed Word document, as I said, their competencies are now listed at the beginning of every module. So it's a quick kind of reference guide again, but this is a Word document that if you wanted to as a CTE, you could just click on and then you would get that, and then you could download that. And again, there's some how-to guides for students, how to share, again, the workbooks and mapping features. There we go. So this is a little video. Let me just... So when you click on that, this will bring up the video. So you won't be able to hear the sound at the moment, but you would play this, and this shows you how to use that mapping function that I showed you a minute ago. Let's see if this is working now. So the Word document that I was saying about, you can print that off as a practice-based educator or a clinician working alongside the students, and have that as a reference for yourself as to the different competencies. This one here, this how-to guide for practice educators, is basically a run through of kind of all the stuff I've run through today, the CAP workbook, the ROT workbook, the Pebble Pocket how-to guide. So that is available for you to view as well. There is one for the students, and then there is how to showing the students again how to share their workbook. So I've included all this in the PowerPoint. So when the PowerPoint then gets sent around, you can refer to this at a later stage. So let me stop sharing for a minute. Are there any questions at this time? Anything that I haven't covered that you would like covered? Anything that's just cropped up? Jane, is there anything that you think I maybe haven't covered?
Could you just go back to that first slide?
Oh, and do the whole lot again. But yeah, so obviously if nothing's coming up now, it might be that next time you're out with a student, you think, oh, I meant to ask that question. Then please either get in contact with your trust contact who can then send us an email, or feel free to send myself an email. If I can't help, I will find someone who can help. We do have a information technology support, and we have a department who supports us with these various bits and pieces. So if I can't work out how to do it, I can find someone who can. I'm just going to have a look and just see, reference the question I asked earlier, whether I've got a response to it. Yeah, so unfortunately there isn't a way for yourself to have a quick check of the progress of the students' workbooks, but if you are concerned, then you can always ping their personal tutor an email, because we can actually go in and do a quick look to see how they're kind of how the progression of their workbook is going. Okay, so there is a link to take you to if you would like to complete a feedback form. And then if you click on this link here, that will take you to the feedback form, or again, scan this QR code and give us some feedback on the session, further sessions that you might like to see, all the previous sessions. So I think this is number 6. We've done previous sessions on mentoring, supporting students, I think safeguarding. I'm trying to remember all the different ones we've done, but they're all available to view at a later stage as well. And again, you can get a certificate attendance for that. You can give us feedback on that. So all these, this is why we record them all. So they're all available to view at a later stage. That's all right, Simon, not a problem. I'm glad it's been of some use. Yeah, that link in the chat as well. I can do that. Bear with. I think I probably need to stop sharing my screen and go into the actual thing to do that. But bear with, I shall do that now. And that's the attendance register, bear with. There we go. So that is the final link. That's for the feedback form. Okay. But yeah, any questions you have, please feel free to ping them over via email, and I will answer them as well as I can do. But I'm going to stop recording now, because I think that's every element covered.